Hi, everybody, and welcome back to yet another cracking installment of the Map Round Show. This is the Built in Colorado series. If you've been living under a rock or in a tree, I forgive you, but you should know what's going on by now. I'm connecting you to rad people, founders and visionaries, just changing the way we do things in the world. So today, very privileged to have with us on the line Mary Grothe, the founder and CEO of House of Revenue. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me.
My privilege is all mine. I've had the opportunity to get to know you and really understand your model, and I think what you're doing is actually really, really exciting. So excited to get your story out into the world. Mary, but for our viewers around the world who haven't heard about you and all the great things that you're doing, why don't you paint a picture for us a little bit about your background and then the origin story to House of Revenue?
Sure. So after 18 troublesome years growing up, I had a pretty traumatic childhood. I thought I had my life plan. I was going to be a professional dancer. I had a scholarship to CU Boulder, thought everything was ready to go. But I got into a bad car accident, and then that was taken away from me. So I entered into 4 of the darkest years of my life, which then I was pulled out of that when I did an interview for a payroll and HR company. They hired me on entry level district sales assistant at $13 an hour. I fell in love with that role. They were so good to me. I grew up a lot while I worked there, 2 years as an admin. And then I was promoted into mid-market sales. I became the #1 rep in 30 days and continued that for the next 2 years that I sold for them. I left the company and went to work for one of my clients who was a small startup. They did back office services. They were yielding about 125,000 in annual revenue. In 7 months, we were able to quadruple the size of the company, and that's when I fell in love with scaling companies. I started my first business at 28 years old. I was a business strategist is what I called myself back then. And I had 3 years, just over 30 businesses that I helped from entrepreneur stage, a lot of idea stage, getting into putting their product or service to market. And then that was exhausting. FYI, made a lot of mistakes as a rookie entrepreneur. And I ended up going back to the payroll company for 3 years, sold millions, got married, bought a house, had a baby. And then that fire inside of me that was screaming, I was just so ready to go be an entrepreneur again. So 5 years ago, almost to the day, I started House of Revenue. I'll pause at that point because that was a lot to take in. That's about 30 some years of my life, but I'll pause at that point. We can go in more into what it is.
You've given the elevator pitch entirely new meaning. Well done.
Thank you.
So let's talk about House of Revenue. So what would you say is the problem that you guys solve? Because on the face of it, you wouldn't say that it is what it is. You know what I mean? Like it. You know what I mean? So I know that piece. So in your own words, like what's this problem here? I know you love scaling companies, but what is House of Revenue trying to resolve?
Well, when we first started 5 years ago, my background was so heavy in sales. I love the sales profession. I had the hypothesis that small business owners needed to solve the sales problem because a lot of CEOs and founders were still doing the sales. And so they were struggling to build a sales department. So that's where it started. For 18 months, we built sales departments for small business CEOs, typically 1 to 3 million in annual revenue. And the founders and CEOs were doing sales themselves. So we helped them grow. In 18 months, we served 45 companies, tremendously high number. It was a great opportunity for us to see the data. So within 18 months, we had a feedback loop. And the businesses who on their own had a really good brand and marketing engine, every single one of them outperformed the other companies. And when we looked at the data, we had a decision to make. Actually, one of our team members, our internal marketing manager, came to me and said, I think that we can help our other clients who have outdated websites or don't have sales collateral or they're not discoverable on Google. I think we can help them. So she actually lent a hand to start beta testing. What if we did a little bit of marketing for our clients who needed it? Well, that got traction fast and she quickly became overwhelmed. So we started recruiting a fractional CMO staff and it was brilliant. By 2020, we were able to launch what we do now. And in fact, at the end of 2020, we rebranded as House of Revenue because we started off as Sales BQ. And in 2020, the hypothesis was that sales and marketing should not be separated. And we were able to go on contract for our clients for a year at a time. We gave them a CRO, a CMO, paired them together. And then we were able to refresh their go-to-market, redo the brand, build a new website, build a marketing engine and team inside their company, build the sales team inside their company and customer success, built that revenue engine. We're a HubSpot partner. We love it. And in 2020, we had 9 companies that we served, and 100% of them scaled. I mean, they were small. On average, they were about 4 million in size. And on average, we added 3.2 million in a single year, a pandemic year, to say the least. It was so much fun. We decided, let's put some power behind this and grow so that we can serve more companies. So here we are in 2022. We've got the capacity to serve 12 companies per year. And we love the work that we get to do. So I'd say the problem that we solve now is twofold. We love serving plateaued companies. So when you get through startup scale, typically you plateau when you get to 3 to 5 million in revenue. That could change depending on the type of company and industry, but it's very common to plateau because what worked to get you through startup scale is no longer working to get you through second stage scale. And that's who we serve, second stage scale. And it's preferable that they've plateaued so that we can come in, refresh that go-to-market, rebrand them. And there's just so much, or brand refresh, but there's so much that goes into the preliminary work to understand why they're plateaued. So that key problem that we solve, I think, is the innovation and creativity behind why they're plateaued. A lot of times when revenue plateaus, the CEOs just try to hire more people, or they'll hire a marketing agency, or they bring in a new VP of sales. They're trying to fix it in these silos, and it doesn't work. They have to fix the root cause of the problem, which is your product or service still desired by the market and at this price point? And have you done a refresh on the competitive analysis to understand who you're going up against, how they're differentiating themselves, what they can offer that you cannot? Have you interviewed your buyers? Have you done primary market research to understand? Because a lot of times it isn't the people that they have or the processes. A lot of times it's centered around the actual product or service is no longer as relevant to the market as it once was, or they're competing against somebody and they haven't pivoted. And so by solving that first, then we can solve the rest of the problems in the revenue ecosystem and infrastructure systems, processes, and the engine. Then we get into the people and et cetera.
Mm-hmm. So when you look at all the startups or scale-ups that you have consulted to in the past, I know you spoke about brand refresh, and it all starts with the customer and the product, and I suppose looking at the whole solution. What would you, because I'm curious to maybe get like a tweet answer from you, like what would you say is the reason why a company gets this initial traction? They've gone through this first phase of scaling, and then they start to plateau. And I think it's a really important question to answer, because a lot of the startups that listen to the show and that have been featured on the show are on that journey, aren't they? Mm-hmm. And so they're in different things, like I know you work with a lot of PE-backed firms, but a lot of them have investors and they can't really afford to do the plateau thing. You know what I mean? Like they actually need to break through that entire thing. They need to cross the chasm, get that early majority, and keep scaling, because valuations are really important, and they need that revenue, right, to get that next funding round, and so on and so forth. So it's a never-ending cycle. So if they don't understand like why, typically, in other words, maybe the better question is like, what are some of the warning signs? Do you know what I'm saying? Like to be looking out for, so that if you are the owner or the CEO of a scaling company, like, hey, there's the canary in the coal mine. Like, what does the canary look like?
Yeah. Well, I only tweet in threads, so be prepared for my answer. Thank you for laughing. I can't say anything short, but I'll do my best. A revenue plateau is typically caused by one of these things. The product or service is no longer rooted in customer need because the buyer has shifted or the market has shifted. Number 2, the people who got you through startup scale are not the right people to get you through second stage. They just possess different skills and a different way of doing work. Additionally, most of startup scale, as it should be, is scrappy, entrepreneurial, not budget friendly. The goal of startup scale is to get product market fit. It's to confirm that you have people consistently want to buy your product or service, and then on the back end of using it, can agree that it solves the problem that you stated in your brand promise or value proposition. If you can do that repeatedly, you have product market fit. Some companies, it takes a very long time to get product market fit. So they actually do need to enter into the next stage of growth where they don't fully have product market fit. There's still some exploration in different segments or user groups. But once you get through that, you're going into go-to-market fit. And the go-to-market fit being the second stage is now, can you actually build a process around it? Because startup scale and to get to product market fit should be whatever you need to do to get the business. You shouldn't be focused and analyzing on the profitability of doing so unless you're bootstrapped. And if you're bootstrapped, you might do it a little bit slower. Like we bootstrapped and we're a services company. And I tested it as I was building it, but I tested in small quantities. And as soon as I saw success on a test, I optimized and I brought on headcount. And when I saw it repeated, that more than just me could do it successfully, then I knew we were set for scale. So in our first year, we did $500,000. Second year, we did 1.5. So we tripled in size. And it was only because we had the proof in the pudding that we could do it, not only just once, but we could do it repeatedly. And then we focused on reducing that client acquisition cost so that we could do it more so at scale and actually make some money. So when you're looking at the initial part of that startup scale, it's different if you're a PE backed, it's different if you're VC backed, it's different if you're bootstrapped, it's different if you're software, it's different if you're product, it's different if you're services. So it's really hard to generalize it in your answer. But one thing with VC backed, we've actually struggled with those engagements. And I'm going to say maybe something unpopular right now, and that's okay, because I'm just speaking from my experience. They're the hardest companies to get through second stage scale because they want to hit a certain milestone or set of metrics in order to unlock the next round of funding. But during that 18 months while you're on that journey, if the buyer or the market or the competition or the data starts telling you a different story, it is very risky to pivot to say, this is what the data is telling us. This is how we need to adjust the numbers. Oftentimes, and I've seen it firsthand, I've had it happen multiple times to engagements that we've been working on. The market and the data is telling us something different than the initial plan, and we have to pivot. But when we do so, some of the clients have lost funding. And it's really disappointing because I struggle with that mentality that you have to work harder to achieve a number that maybe isn't in the best interest of the company long term in order to unlock that next round of funding. So it's not all VC back. It's just what we've experienced a few times. It's actually quite frustrating. I love PE backed because we seem to be on the same page with what we're trying to achieve. And they will welcome a pivot all day long. They are so interested, at least the firms we work with, if we come through and say, hold the phone. This is what the data is showing us. These are the leading indicators. Like we have to pivot right now because the fear is that we're going to hit ABC, and miss on the lagging. And they love it. And so they make better partners. That's just been our experience. I don't want to speak in absolute. I don't think that that's the right thing to do. I think there's good and bad on both sides. But then, then you have bootstrap, which is probably more so my favorite.
Mm-hmm. So curious to double click on a couple of things there. So the first one, you actually enable like these fractional CRO and CMO, teams as a branding person in there sometimes too. What is fractional all about? So I'm like a fractional chief media officer for startups. So it's almost complementary to what you're doing, I would say, on face value. But I didn't know about this whole fractional thing until I got to the States, weirdly. So like, and I've been here like 4 months only. So please explain for our audience around the world, what is this fractional idea? Why does it matter?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Fractional can be interpreted differently. So let me share with you what I know. Fractional can be more of a part-time consultant, or it can be more like a part-time staff augmentation. Many fractionals are on the consultant side. They have several clients, 5 to 10 clients, and they're really just consulting and advising. They're not doing the work. They have a fractional CRO title. They sit in a very good advisory seat. They're very strategic. They're a good sounding board. They attach themselves to a company maybe 6 to 12 months, and they're truly advising that revenue team, but they're not doing the work. The other version of fractional is you get a fraction of their time, but it's really a full-time employee, but they're split. So at House of Revenue, our fractionals are split between 2 clients. So it's 50-50. They're very talented. They're very good at what they do. And the thing that most of our clients feel is that they are full-time, because a lot of a full-time person's role is responding to email and death by meeting and sitting on the, town hall meeting and kudosing to people and talking about charity events. That's fine. Those are good things for employee culture. But you're really, with House of Revenue, the hours that we're stripping out of not a full-time employee, like you're getting the meat of the actual functional work of a CRO. And it's done very efficiently and done very well. So for us, we are on the side of staff augmentation. So this solves a couple problems in the market. And this is why people like working with us. One, we have a 40-day intro period. Most CROs fail. They have a very high fail rate. Not shocking, so do CMOs. The lifetime of one is 18 months, the lifetime of the other is 19 months. Days are very high fail rate. There's different reasons on the different roles. I'll speak to CRO briefly. Most CROs at the price point to get a good one are not given the runway and the budget and the resources and time that they need in order to do the work to rebuild the engine and enhance it before optimizing and scaling. Many companies prematurely hire a CRO with a vision of, okay, we're ready to make a $500,000 investment, but they need to perform right away. Like, we can only sustain that extra overhead for 3 months and we have to start seeing results. Otherwise, we can't justify this position. Well, a great CRO is hopefully asking the questions before they take the job, because that's just not realistic unless the company is already on a very strong growth trajectory. So another reason that they fail is there's confusion around what a CRO is. A CRO is not a glorified sales leader, yet that is predominantly what they are hired for. A real CRO is a holistic revenue leader who successfully owns and oversees all of revenue for an organization, go-to-market strategy, everything into brand strategy, marketing, sales, customer success, and revenue operations. But yet many are not hired to do that, and they're not set up to succeed. Or if they're hired to do that, but the organization has never brought on a holistic revenue leader, sometimes there's dysfunction inside of the company with different department heads who exude strong biases toward their department or strong bias toward their department. And so it can be very difficult without leadership's blessing to really open it up. So what we look at is we help reduce the fail rate of a CRO, because let me back up. In the 40-day, we do all the audit, the research, the competitive analysis, the comparison of the product and service against others in the market through secret shopping, pricing analysis, voice of the customer. If I didn't already say primary market research, we talk to and interview people on the staff and learn from them and understand what's working, what's not, and understand the vision and where people think the company can go. We take all of that, compile it together, and we produce a roadmap for the CEO to make a yes/no decision. If you truly want to grow your company, this is the time it's going to take, and this is an estimate of how much it's going to cost. This is the headcount that you need. And so we develop this entire plan and show them so that they are educated and truly understanding before they engage in an annual contract to say, okay, I understand this is going to cost me $1 million to grow, and here's the potential outcomes of this. So we solve a lot of the issues that most CROs have because we start with this 40-day entry point. Like, wouldn't it be great if you went to go hire an employee and you said, work for me first for 40 days on contract, and let me see what your plan actually is before I say yes to working with you. It's such a dream because both parties get to work with each other and see where the collaboration is going to be in the communication styles. But then when we say yes to it, there's something beautiful that happens. If they knock it out of the park and they love working together, we allow our employees to go work for our clients. There's a placement fee and a 90-day transition. But then they were able to test for a year that relationship. And then if both parties think it's a mutual fit, they can go do that. And we've placed about 8 people in 3 years.
Very interesting. So I was just on your website, I was downloading your methodology, and I also had a look at your partner video too last week, I think it was. What makes your methodology, well, firstly, what is your methodology and what makes it unique? Because it seems to me like if you're going into PE-backed firms in different industries, different customers, different product solutions, etc., different life stages even, my experience is that there can't really be a one-size-fits-all approach. So what is your methodology? Like, how do you get to build a revenue
Mhm.
engine? Do you know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
how do you get there? Because I think if we can figure that stuff out, then we can all
Yes.
benefit from this, right?
Yes. The methodology is a great tool to download on our website, but it's high level. It's for us to be able to lay out all the magic of our work would be impossible because everything we do is custom built to each client and the use cases are so different. But the methodology at least helps people understand the key core elements of what has to happen every time in order to be successful. Breaking it down in its simplest form, we follow a process that involves audit and research, building and testing, optimizing and scaling, and then empowering. The audit and research I just explained in detail. The building and testing is when we actually take the findings from the research, we build a plan, we go in, we start doing with the refresh of the brand. We'll build a new website, we build out the marketing automation, usually on HubSpot. Okay, all the time on HubSpot. And then we're able to build out the marketing team. So we're recruiting, hiring, developing talent. The marketing strategy is usually based on ICP specific, so individual buyers and verticals, and we're very much focused on ensuring that we're speaking in the buyer's language. So every company's product or service differs in a language standpoint based on the buyer. They care, it could be the same product or service that you're selling, but two different buyers care about it. It needs to be translated for them. And based on that translation, it should be on the website, but then the campaigns built around it, and then the sales enablement collateral, and potentially even having different pitch decks or sales decks, different sales discovery questions inside of the sales playbook. And so our methodology is very centered around being rooted in customer need and speaking the customer's language, starting from when they're a buyer. And we start then at brand strategy into the marketing and sales funnel. And then as we get into the rest of the bow tie funnel on that, we just have to make sure that we're building processes that do not have friction. Buyers want to buy, not go through 10 steps in order to get a proposal and be passed around to a bunch of people or work with somebody who doesn't understand their day in the life. They also want to be onboarded seamlessly and not have to start from scratch and repeat their whole situation because the handoff from sales to implementation was sloppy. They want to have a clean and clear implementation and onboarding process. They want to be trained and fully adopted inside of the technology or service. And then it depends on how the relationship is managed from that point. That's going to be a winning formula. So we look at and building out within inside of our clients is just how do we build the relationship management component? Is it a CSM? Is it an account manager? Is it both? What is the retention criteria? What is the expansion criteria? And then how do we turn them into advocates? So the methodology, again, I'll just repeat to summarize: audit research, build and test, optimize and scale, and then empower. Inside of that, the methodology for revenue is very centered around being rooted in customer need, having a competitive differentiation, speaking the buyer's language, removing friction from the process to become a customer and to retain as a customer, and enjoying them as an advocate and having their advocacy flow back into top of funnel.
Amazing. Thanks, Mary. So just a couple of things. So I know because I talk to startups all the time, especially the CEOs, and they're kind of wrestling with short term like revenue goals versus
Mhm.
like investing in the long term. And I find this to be a kind of a friction point. So I spoke to a CEO yesterday of a startup in New York, excuse me, and it was a similar discussion. I was like, "Yo, like you need this. You know,
Mhm.
you've told me you need this. It's a long-term investment that's going to solve your short-term need, but oftentimes, you know what I mean. Like it's like they're in this interesting, stressful context where they're not prepared to think long-term because they
Mhm.
have a short-term need." And one of the things I'd love to ask you is how do you reconcile that? You know what I mean? How do you
Mhm.
get the CEO to say, "Hey, I know we're in shit now, or we're in pressure now. Like we know that our revenues are like plateauing. It's not good, right? It's just
Mhm.
not good, right? It could be the beginning and the end. The growth is baked into the customer need, as you said.
Mhm.
And so, what's your advice to like a startup founder who's in this
Mhm.
context and needs to invest long term to solve the short term problem? It's like, I'm not prepared to do that.
Short-term revenue is accessible. It can be attained, but you have to be super clear on where it can come from. The two easiest places would be inside of the current client base. What we have found is that there's a lot of revenue sitting inside of the current client base that has not been sold. What I mean by that is if you look at and do an audit of your current clients, now, if you only sell one product or one service, this doesn't really work. But if you're of the many companies who sell multiple things, and for example, I used to sell payroll and HR services. So I'd sell them on a core bundle of payroll, time and attendance, and HR. But then I could upsell them over time on benefits administration, applicant tracking, workers' comp, 401k, premier HR services, you name it, background checks. I had a whole slew of things I could sell. So what I would do is I'd get the business and then I would build a map over time on how I plan to upsell and would assign a quota on each account. Most companies don't do that. They get what they can, they sell the client, and then upselling is, complete afterthought if it's ever done. So one of the quickest ways to inject cash into a company to finance growth is to go to the current client base and to perform an audit to understand how much revenue is sitting in the base that could be sold, developing a plan around that, sorting and ranking and tiering out your clients and coming up with an account plan per and a very specific timeline. You could use marketing, salespeople, account managers to have those conversations to get the customers excited about augmenting their current product or service set. If that's not a possibility, and in addition to, is client advocacy. Typically, what we find is that clients are willing to make introductions. We just have to do the heavy lifting for them. And so there could be a client advocacy program that either offers an incentive in a very gamified way that is comforting and feels fun to the clients to make those introductions. Or you can have one-on-one through account management or customer success managers, or even through the CEO themselves, just depending on the size of the company, to look at the top relationships and then to go on LinkedIn, see who they're mutually connected to, see what type of groups they're a part of. Like if they're a part of EO as an example, or another group like a Vistage, or anywhere that there may be like opportunities with others like them, other potential clients. And then to get in one-on-one and to express, we're very interested in growing the business. You've been an exceptional client. I noticed you're connected to so-and-so and so-and-so. Are you in a position that if I wrote it for you, you'd be willing to send an introduction? Of course, you can edit it so it sounds okay coming from your voice. I'd love to do the heavy lifting for you, but it would be extremely meaningful for us in this stage of our growth. And in exchange for that, we'd love to offer you, fill in the blank or whatever. And I say, oh, no, I don't need anything. I'd be happy to make the introduction. They just don't want to do the heavy lifting. So there's a way that you can engage happy customers right out of the gate. There's other ways that you can inject quick cash into the business. One way would be through paid media. We have found that through paid media, we are able to get some good wins and transactions into the funnel. It may not be a long-term strategy that the CEO is excited about because paid media can be expensive and it might have diminishing returns. You would probably know a lot in this area. So what we might introduce, for example, if we introduce a long-term SEO, organic, or partnership type strategy, that's going to just take time to perform. We could supplement top of funnel today through a paid strategy, and then we can get quick conversions. Even though they're going to come at a higher client acquisition cost, it is pipeline today. And then getting your best people on those to convert to create some of that cash flow to finance growth. The last part that I would recommend is many of our clients have done is they've accessed debt or capital in order to finance the growth. There are providers out there that can offer you something similar to a line of credit. It's just not offered through a bank, but they'll tell you how much you are authorized for, and you can just draw from it as you need. You'll have immediate principal and interest payments due against that, but it's very inexpensive short-term debt. And that's something that could be used. You could also go the SBA route. You could take on an equity partner. There's so many different things you could do. But if you have a very clear revenue scaling plan that says your growth is going to cost this much over time and this is the anticipated return, it makes taking on debt feel a little bit more comfortable, or giving up a portion of the company to bring on an equity partner as an example. It makes it a little bit more comfortable because you have better visibility into where that return might be. So those are some ways to create some cash in the beginning.
Yeah, all great advice. So just on the product side, another thing that a lot of startups believe in is this idea of product-led growth. So, right? It's like if you build it, they'll come, right? And so, we're not prepared to spend money on paid ads because, our product will sell itself. It's a really interesting, and I know there's context and nuance in this in the answer probably, but my question is, from your experience, How much is product-led growth a myth?
You just have to have the right equation. It can be successful, but the myth of it is around if I build it, they will come. Sorry, it's a very crowded space. And to do it well, you have to have the right product, intimate understanding of your buyer and their behaviors. And you also have to have a buying engine that is seamless and super easy for people to sign on. What I've noticed, I had a couple of clients that came to us earlier last year and said, hey, we want you to lead with a PLG strategy. They were sales-led organizations. They wanted to convert that to PLG. Great. Let's do our audit and we'll tell you exactly how that's going to happen. One of the companies, they were 20 million in revenue. And we came back with a report they were not excited to see. There was no way to purchase the product or service on their website. Can we just start there? Also, there was no way to self-onboard. You had to onboard with an implementation person. There's also not a way for them to add more users to the account. And there wasn't an automated way to pay that invoice ongoing. So we pulled a report together and said, we understand that you would like to go this direction, but you're looking at least at a 6 to 9 month roadmap, depending on how fast your tech team can work. And it is an entire shift. It's a whole, it's a rebuild on the website, because their website was built and all the marketing messaging and their brand equity that had been built to that point, they were more of an enterprise player. And everyone who had known them, it was all about more of that sales-led purchase and going through procurement and getting the PO and having this long onboarding. I'm like, well, that's not PLG. So we had another company that was set up well, but they have no volume, no traffic, no brand recognition, and they're not a need to have, they're a nice to have. So we set up their engine very seamlessly as PLG. So there's no friction. It's so easy to sign on, to use it right away, to use it for free, convert if you want the advanced features, and put in a credit card and pay for it. All of that was taken care of. But there in the beginning, there was absolutely no brand awareness and absolutely no traction to the website. And the use case was a nice to have. It was new to the market. And whenever you're selling a new idea that isn't rooted in pain or need, and it's more of a, wow, I never really thought that that was a problem that was solvable. That could probably save me a little bit of time. But it wasn't rooted in like, I deal with that every single day. I need a new solution. I'm signing up for this right now. And so the battle with that go-to-market strategy has been volume ramping and awareness and driving traffic. And we've been able to do it without paid. We are starting to rank organically after 7 or 8 months, and the traffic is organically growing. And it's beautiful. We've also hired an outbound team that is just smiling and dialing and just presenting to the market of what this is. And it's helping. And we're starting to see the numbers dramatically increase. We're also working from a PR standpoint. We're also working from more of a partner strategy and securing very large accounts that will have multiple users across the United States. So there are strategies to do that. But PLG, we're not all Slack, so we're clear. Like, we're just not. We're not Zoom and signing up for a free account. Like, it's so different for startup sales. Like, I won't have the overhead and expense of the paid me. Okay. There's actually quite a bit that goes into it. It's fine to have it as an end goal, but you may have to make some of those investments initially until you start to catch some traction.
So maybe just to stick with the product-led growth, there's a lot of talk about the funnel, right? And one of the things in your methodology that I picked up on, like, there's the buyer's journey, the customer's journey, and you talk about this idea of the bow tie funnel. So curious about that. It obviously looks like a bow tie, but I'd love for you just to spend a minute or two unpacking its relevance to revenue generation.
Yeah, the bow tie funnel is our world. It's so powerful when you look at the customer relationship, customer experience as a whole. Is the first half of the bow tie, and yes, it is actually a bow tie. So it's a funnel turned sideways with that skinny point in the middle being the purchase step. So on the buyer's journey side, you're looking at awareness and then going into consideration and then decision and then purchase. On the customer side of the funnel, where it grows big again, is where you have adoption, retention, expansion, and advocacy. And advocacy is just as big as awareness if you look at the symmetrical bow tie. And so we've spoken about the bow tie a few times today as we're talking about the methodology and being a holistic CRO and encompassing all parts of revenue into their work and into the strategy. For us, the bow tie was a game changer. As I told you at the top of the show, when we first started, we were all about the sales funnel. We didn't even talk about marketing. I used to be a salesperson that was a sales unicorn. I did everything and hustle culture. I found every opportunity. I didn't have marketing. I didn't have inbound leads. I worked for a big company, but they were predominantly known for small business. And I worked in the mid and up market. I couldn't use any of the company collateral that we had because it all spoke to like 7 employee companies. I was selling 700 employee companies. So I couldn't use it. It worked against me in most cases. But as a sales unicorn, I just built it all and did it all from scratch. And so I never even took into consideration anything about how marketing could help the sales funnel. And that's how I built the company because that was the lens through which I built it. But then as we grew and realized that's not the case, it was very easy for us to adopt the bow tie funnel, to realize that there really is no separation. I mean, marketing supports the entire bow tie, and it's so clearly delineated of the experience we're creating on the buyer side versus the customer side.
Amazing. I must say, you're a total rock star. Like genuinely, like I've met a lot of smart people in my lifetime, but you right up there, I must say.
Oh, man.
I mean that sincerely, not a PR
Thank you.
punt. Like I meet smart people every day through this
Thank
show,
you.
and I would trust you with my shit any day of the week. So, so I'd love to maybe change gears a little bit, and in fact maybe come back to something that you said, because you spoke about there's a, in the context of short-term revenue generation, because I often find there's the startup that's looking to raise money, and everyone I know who's in a raise is like, they all say it's the hardest thing they've ever done. Like building a startup is hard, but then raising money to fund that thing or fund that startup is even harder. And I'm curious to get your view on this idea of shared dilution, because I find like a lot of startups are offsetting the need for short-term revenue with a prayer, which is like, we're going to raise money to solve this problem so we can get the runway. I mean, just yesterday, got a new potential client closed their seed round for like 2.5 million. But like if they hadn't have done that, like they would have been in a lot of trouble. You know what I mean? And so one of the friction points is when the founder or CEO is caught up on how much they're going to be diluting in terms of their cap table and so forth. Question is, how caught up should you be actually on things like share dilution and valuation today, because the market is, where it's at, right? It's not as great as it was, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, even 2 years ago. So what's your words of wisdom there?
Yeah. So you just got done talking about how I'm such a smart person, but now I get to humbly say I actually don't know a lot on this topic. I personally have never raised capital. I've got to walk the journey side by side with some of our clients, but I've never intimately walked the walk. And as I spoke candidly earlier, I actually prefer not to work with companies who are raising in the C to Series A and Series A to Series B. It's caused nothing but friction and problems inside of our engagement. I also, after the raise closes, our team has a ridiculous amount of pressure put on them. And I think having to report to the board and investors and those weekly investor decks and everything else is just so stressful. And there's so much focus on the burn and how we have to make it last and how every decision is so critical. But then, as I spoke to you earlier, what if the market shifts? What if the buyer's telling you something different? What if a new competitor comes onto the scene? Do you remain the opportunity to be agile? Or does it affect your investors and affect the viability of the next raise? And I actually don't like working in that environment. I don't like unnecessary pressure. I know that there are revenue leaders that live for that thrill and they're brilliant in the work. They've also firsthand sat in the seat and probably worked as a right hand to a founder who was going through that. And so they found a passion and a thrill to do it. but I don't feel very qualified to answer
Mm.
that question, in a way that I would put my name on it. What I have heard is that the raising right now is the most difficult it's been, in the lifetime for some of these startups and entrepreneurs. This might be their second or third time, or that maybe they're doing second or third raise, and they're saying it's completely changed. I follow a lot of startup founders on Twitter, and I've just seen tweet after tweet after tweet, and even on LinkedIn, post after post after post, that the entire landscape has changed, and it's never been harder. So when I see those things, I like to pick and choose, and I don't want to be a part of it. The last thing I'll say on this, which may be helpful, is one of my friends is a CTO, and she's a startup CTO, and she builds MVPs for startups that are going to raise. And she talks about ways to get customer acquisition on an MVP to a level and try to bootstrap or to use some short-term debt financing for an MVP, and then to get some clients on board to greatly reduce how much you need to give away before you do your first raise. And so she's very passionate about that. And I had her on our revenue radio show a couple of years ago, but that's really just to the extent of my knowledge. I haven't played a lot in that space.
Mm. But it's curious, isn't it, that you choose not to go there? Do you know what I mean? Like from my perspective. So, because you would think, well, your value set, you know what I mean? Like you've raised, like you got to burn that cash to get that and you would want a team like a CRO or a fractional CRO or fractional CMO, whatever, to help you cross the chasm. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And so it's interesting for me to hear, like, even though you could absolutely add value there, but you choose not to. You know what I'm saying? Like you're going into the PE space, which is, well, PE-backed companies, I should say. It's curious for me on why that is.
Oh, I can tell you the stress that we went through with one of our clients in 2021. They closed 1.8 million in seed, and it was a battle every day. There were 4 founders and then our team, and everybody had an opinion on how that money should be spent. And because it wasn't at the dollar amount that they hoped for, they were watching burn and watching the expense to a point that it was unhealthy. And we presented the plan to say, if you want to achieve this, then you need to do these things. And they were cutting corners everywhere. Well, let's preserve on this. No, I'm not going to spend money on this. It's like, well, this was part of the plan that you approved. You can't get this result if we don't do this. I know, but the reality of the burn is here, and we just can't do that. I know we said we could, but we can't. We've got to allocate here. And working in such limited confines, is that the word? And then under a short amount of time where they have to report up, it was one of the most stressful situations. And my team's like, get us out of here. We are not being trusted to do our job and to do it right and to do it well. That's one experience of many. Every one of our clients that closed seed or series A that we worked with in 2021 was the exact same way. There were probably 4 or 5 of them. And the work was exhausting. Yet our other companies that were bootstrapped, or that just took on short-term debt, or that were PE backed, every single one of them scaled, and we had no issue. And we got to do it our way with us being in charge and being in the seat. But so I thought this would be so cool in 2021. I thought this is a brilliant go-to-market strategy for House of Revenue. You find a company that just closed a round and they've got 2 million to spend. I'll tell you right now how to spend that 2 million in the most profitable way. But what we found is that there's so much stress, like it's almost like dirty money. Like there's this fear, there's so much fear, anxiety, and stress wrapped in that raise. And I've never experienced anything like it. And after 4 or 5 just horrendous engagements and my team getting discouraged and beat up and burnt out, I was like, I do not want this anymore. It's so weird. And again, I don't want to speak in absolutes. That's only my experience. And I would, love to hear other stories where this was successful, but it's just been our experience. And we do so well in the other environments.
But I think I would love to get to, in my mind, like reconcile that, right? Because I do think you're right. I think even when I was chatting to the startup yesterday, they closed that seed round for 2.5 or what have you, I sensed that there was a lot of fear around how to spend it. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you put 10 grand there, well, it's 10 grand you're not going to have in
Mm-hmm.
12 months' time, and especially if you haven't reached a certain scale, like you haven't quite hit 3 million or 5 million or what have
Mm-hmm.
you. And I think there's I would almost my sense is that there's different types of capital. There's venture capital or seed capital or angel capital. So you have to burn it, and there's fear around it because you just don't know any better. You typically in a context that you're not comfortable with, or you don't have any evidence or no proof. You don't have enough like there's fear around how to spend that. If you are a $10 million manufacturing company with PE money, it's a different type of thing, isn't it? It's a different
Very
type of
different.
it's a completely different context. And I think probably one of the most overlooked words in business today, startups or whatever the type of business is, it's context. That's the word.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you change the context, you change everything. So PE money, it's like, well, dude, I'm with you for 10 years. So because that's my fund and I need to get my investors, an ROI with these PE backed companies, these 10 or these 5 or these 3 or 20, whatever it is. But we've got 10 years in this
Mm-hmm.
fund to get the highest return possible. I'm in it for the long term. An angel investor is also in it for the long term, or at least that's what they will say. But the capital is actually, my
Mm-hmm.
experience, is being spent on, you must burn it and you must do it because I want to see you guys, like hit
Mm-hmm.
certain revenue numbers so that you can get the next round. I get a greater share of that future valuation, and so I'm winning as an angel. Do you
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? Like it's a
Yes.
different type of investor mindset, isn't it?
Well, yes, I'm an angel investor and I have two in my portfolio. That was something I did this year. And I have that mindset.
Yeah, cool. Well, look, you've got an amazing book coming out. It is called Destination Remarkable: Surviving the Dark Side of Success. Sounds very interesting. I'm intrigued. Give us the premise.
Yeah, at the top of the show, I spoke about the traumatic childhood upbringing that I had. And apparently, Forbes thought it was attractive enough to publish a book about it. So I'm very honored to be able to work under that Forbes Books brand. And I'll actually be having two books published with them. But the first one is my life story, and it talks about being the child of an alcoholic parent with an abusive dad. My mom was the alcoholic. And growing up in the performing arts, I had a really cool side of my upbringing with them owning a performing arts studio. My dad was an actor and singer, and my mom, he was an opera singer. He was amazing. My mom was a pianist and choral director. And there was an there's so many twists and turns just in the childhood component. And then when my parents lost everything after stealing from people for a couple of years, lost everything, we had to put a red and white tent, giant red and white tent in our backyard, auctioned off everything we owned. We lost the house to the bank and we moved and fled is what we did to from Indiana to Colorado. And I was 14 years old and about to turn 15 and learned that my parents had to file bankruptcy, and I learned about some of their transgressions, and I had to fully support myself. Both my brother and I did. So I've been fully supporting myself since I was 16. It couldn't when I was 15 because the labor laws only allow you to work so many hours per week, and it wasn't enough to survive. And my mom was a co-signer on the account during the time she was actually taking my money. I was stealing food to survive. They were making me like pay rent. And I mean, it was awful. But by the time I was 16, she got off the account. I was able to start fully supporting myself. And I thought I had my life plan as a professional dancer. That got taken away. And then I went through four of the scariest, darkest years of my life. And thankfully, through getting onboarded with that payroll company, everything changed for me. And it documents the story of so many ups and downs and really healing from that trauma because I carried it with me through my 20s. I had so many holes in my heart. I never felt loved as a child and was verbally, mentally, emotionally abused. And I needed to heal from that, but I didn't know how to. So I masked it with success. And I rose to the top of the ranks and I was a number one rep. And at 24, I was making a couple $100,000 a year. And all of a sudden, I found short term healing in being number one and in winning. And it felt so good that finally somebody was thinking I was good enough and of value. So I chased it so hard. And so on the outside looking in, by the time I was 28, I was a CEO. I had this amazing career in my 20s. I did so much before I was 30, and I was so broken on the inside. and I was drinking every night, following right into my mom's footsteps. I was partying super hard. I was just constantly revolving in relationships, and everything was so broken. But to the eye of the world, I was incredibly successful. So the story documents what it looked like to live through that. And I ended up crashing my car a night after drinking and went to jail. And shortly after that, I came to the Lord and was saved. And part of my journey is just transitioning from this slave to the world and trying to do everything that the world told me to do, which just ended in so much despair. And then shifting my life and becoming a Christian woman and a woman of faith, and how everything changed after that. So as I got into my 30s, I got married and had a baby and started this company, and the blessings that have just been a part of my life and the peace. But it's not that I'm exempt from trials and challenges. So there's this period of my life is like this honeymoon, and then all of a sudden things get hard again. And so I'm documenting that inside of the book and talking about being a second time founder and scaling a company from 0 to 5 million in 4 years, bootstrapped, services business, which is the hardest thing to scale, and documenting all of those steps of being a founder and CEO. And so I'm really excited that they chose to work with me on this. And I do share a lot of this on my personal podcast by the same name, Destination Remarkable, and then on my Instagram and my LinkedIn. The second book is really not as exciting, but I think it's equally as powerful. And that's a revenue scaling playbook. I absolutely love go-to-market strategy and scaling revenue. It's a talent, it's an obsession, it's a passion. I absolutely love all things revenue. And so going more into that Forbes books brand, the second book's going to be very business oriented, focused on all of those aspects of scaling revenue. And that'll publish in April of 24. I'm just really honored that they chose to include me with their prestigious brand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like it. Well, I think you have value. Okay, I'm saying it for everyone. I don't care who you what. Judge me, people. Judge me. All right.
Thank you.
But funny story. Like when I was 16, my dad also like disowned me. You know what I mean? Like my parents were going through like it was a shit show. And like I had to go and work also because my dad was like, "Yo, I'm out." And I remember when I was, and then I finished school at like I call high school. I think you call like elementary or whatever. So I was like 18, trying to figure all that stuff out. Still trying to like transform my education to the like the current U.S. structures. But I remember like one day I was in my first year of like college. I get called into the like the administrator's office, and they go, "Hey, we need you to pay for your term." And I'm like, no, my dad's paying for it. And they're like, no, he hasn't paid at all. So I had to work to put myself through college from like, you know what I mean? So
Mm-hmm.
I hear you with what you're saying. And I do think also that like I wouldn't change it. You know what I mean? Because it sucked, but it made me, it gave me like the qualities of grit and tenacity and self-belief. You know what I mean? Like
Yes.
you, no matter what life throws at you, you can overcome those things. And
Mm-hmm.
I think, I hear you and I get it. And I
Thank you.
think, and I think it's what makes people struggle is what makes people high performers. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah, it
if you,
builds the resiliency. It builds the ability to bounce back. It increases your capacity. It reduces the fear and anxiety because you go through so much adversity and challenge that you just become used to it. You build up the muscles, and you can navigate and work through things normal common people can't. Although there are days I beg to be normal and common. I've said that multiple times. I just want to be normal for a day. I don't want to be a CEO today. I don't want this responsibility. I don't want what races through my mind. I don't want the weight. I just want to be normal today. I want to unplug and pretend I don't have that title. And I would just like to be a normal human being out in the world today. And, with great responsibility comes great, or with great power comes great responsibility. Is that the quote?
mm-hmm,
So it's like Superman or Spider-Man or something. Spider-Man, I don't know. So like I get it, but it's hard. It's hard. And some days are downright exhausting. But I agree with you. I wouldn't change anything in my past. I love who I am today. But the bigger component is I was shameful of my life for so long, and I did not share it with anyone. And I hid it. I even hid it from my husband. He's learning about these things about myself, and we've been together almost 10 years, and he's learning these things about me just now because he never pried. He knew it was hard, but he's like, whatever it was, I love who you are. Let's just go with that. And as he's learning, he cannot even believe I endured what I endured. And it sounded like you had, just equally so difficult, but it builds characteristics inside of us that allows us to go take great responsibility in the world. And I don't take that lightly. I'm grateful for the
Hmm.
life that I've been given and the path that I've gone down.
Well, Mary, I'm grateful for you to have you here. I think we've only just scratched the surface, but I think what you're doing is remarkable and valuable, and I wish you all the very best in the future, especially with your book launch in Jan.
Thank you so much for having me today, Matt.
You're very welcome. Cheers, everyone.